What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?
Meet Asha Sharma, the new leader of Xbox.
Just making my way, baby.
Phil Spencer, the man who tried to save it.
I told you. I'd make it.
You made it. You can rest now.
No rest. Never stop moving.
Babe. Oh, babe. You stopped moving way back there.
If the Sony PlayStation was born out of revenge, which by the way I do have a video on that in my channel, then the Xbox was born out of paranoia. By the late 1990s, Microsoft was basically the tech Death Star, a massive machine able to destroy anything and any competitor in its path. And then Sony unveiled the PlayStation 2, and framed it as a machine that could replace the PC. So a group of renegade developers built a direct Xbox out of PC parts and pitched it as a gaming console to Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. In February 2000, they called the team into what became known as the Valentine's Day Massacre. This was the pitch meeting where Xbox would either be approved or cancelled. When Gates found out it wouldn't run on Windows, he threw the presentation across the table and reportedly screamed, "It's a insult to everything I've done for this company. Why are you trying to kill Windows?" It wasn't until Gates realized that Microsoft could lose the living room to Sony that he sat and stewed on it for a few minutes, then agreed. The Xbox was officially born. Then he gave those renegades $1 billion to go build and market the first ever Xbox. The original Xbox launched in 2001 with thunderclaps and green plasma explosions, meant to express immense power straining to break free. Then the Xbox 360 doubled down with an energetic tone. No other Microsoft product looked like that. And if we're being honest, the Xbox 360 era was the greatest period Microsoft ever had in gaming. The marketing was brilliant, the games were amazing, and it was innovating and pushing gaming forward with advancements in matchmaking, multiplayer, achievements, and gamer score. For nearly a decade, Xbox functioned like a group of renegades inside a corporate environment. In fact, to keep the Xbox brand separate, they physically separated themselves from the rest of Microsoft, working off the Redmond corporate campus in another building down the street just to keep that separation. Microsoft executives tolerated it. That wouldn't last forever. May 21st, 2013, the day Xbox, really as we knew it, died. And I have a video on that in my channel as well. Microsoft announces the Xbox One, which requires a constant internet connection, used games needing transfer fees, it ships at a higher price with a mandatory connect. Just a dismal announcement. In those 60 minutes, Microsoft killed off the momentum they built up with the Xbox 360. Gone were those original renegades that helped build the Xbox. In their place were corporate executives. Again, you can check out my other video on that whole catastrophe. And even the marketing changed. During the Xbox 360, the brand felt and looked different than anything else at Microsoft. This was done on purpose. The Xbox leadership during that period didn't want Xbox to feel corporate. By the time Xbox One launched, that all changed. The marketing and brand had to fall in line with the rest of Microsoft's brand efforts. Xbox became just another line of business that had to sit neatly beside Windows, Surface, and Office. The brand reputation for Xbox was completely damaged. But, as Bane once said, there can be no true despair without hope. By early 2014, that hope came in the form of Phil Spencer, when he was named head of Xbox. Now here's the thing about Phil, he's actually a great guy. In fact, full disclosure, I've met him numerous times and even worked on a couple projects with him. For a guy who leads a multi-billion-dollar business, he was always approachable, very friendly when you chatted him up, and he is a gamer, a real one. Someone who'd hop online with fans and actually play with them. Sometimes you kind of had to wonder how much work was he actually doing when you'd see him online playing. He joined Microsoft in 1988 as an intern on Encarta and something called Microsoft Dogs. Internally, it was a product that Microsoft would punish low-performing programmers to work on, and then he spent years clawing his way towards the games division. When he eventually took over Xbox, he had been inside Microsoft for over 25 years, waiting for exactly this moment.
Phil, congratulations on the job.
Thanks, Larry.
You got a lot of work coming up. Let's talk about your new role. What are you going to be doing?
And he moved fast. He killed the Kinect mandate, dropped the console price, launched backward compatibility, and pushed for crossplay. Two things even Sony didn't really want to do. Now, the man who made Phil CEO of Xbox had just been anointed CEO of Microsoft months earlier, Satya Nadella, and he didn't care much for games. His first move was declaring Microsoft's new direction, mobile first, cloud first. Satya had come up Microsoft's server division and he was rebuilding the entire company around it. Gaming, in his mind, was a platform, a distribution channel, a subscriber base. Basically a proof point for Azure's capabilities. Phil understood he'd have to toe the company line. So from day one of the Phil Spencer era, two missions ran simultaneously. What was good for gamers, and what was good for Microsoft shareholders. Unlike Sony, where gaming is their bread and butter, gaming for Microsoft was a nice to have. So Phil scores his first major move, and probably the greatest achievement he ever made for Xbox by acquiring Mojang, makers of Minecraft, for $2.5 billion. Phil had tried to buy Minecraft before, and guess who passed? Don Matrick, of course. But Phil didn't give up. When Satya took over and Phil got the job, he closed the deal. Minecraft became one of the best-selling video games in history. Satya didn't call it a game, by the way. He called it an open-world platform. Well, technically it's true, but of course he'd frame it that way. Under Ballmer, Xbox survived by fighting. Under Satya, Xbox survived by aligning. Phil's skill was in translation, turning gamer-friendly decisions into shareholder-friendly strategy. The translation kept Xbox alive during a time when the board actually wanted to spin off or kill the Xbox division entirely. But it also bound it to whatever Microsoft and Satya needed next. So this is where the wheels started to shake. Scalebound. It was a collaboration with Platinum Games, the studio behind Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising. Shown at E3 with a lot of hype, but without warning or explanation, cancelled. Platinum Games was blindsided. Phil issued a brief statement, and that was that. Phil continued to show up at every E3 with the stage full of trailers and announcements, but the calendar between those stages kept coming up thin. Crackdown 3 is probably the best example of what this era looked like. Announced at E3 2014, the game promised something exciting: cloud-powered destruction. Every building in the city completely destroyable in real time, processing offloaded to Microsoft Azure. They even got Terry Crews to star in it. But the game got delayed from 2016 to 2017, then to 2018, and finally quietly released in 2019. By the time it launched, that revolutionary cloud destruction had been downgraded to one multiplayer mode. The promise that sold the game? Gone. Xbox needed a blockbuster, and Crackdown 3 was meh. One trailer after another, one "we can't wait to show you more" after another. Xbox had the talent, they just couldn't ship quality games that could sell consoles like they did in the Xbox 360 era. Phil was saying the right things, the calendar just wasn't backing him up. He had to straddle the line between gamer CEO and the corporate operator. Xbox Game Pass launched in 2017 as a Netflix-style subscription. Satya ran a subscription empire, Office 365, Azure, recurring revenue. A year later, they announced every first-party Xbox title would launch day one on Game Pass. It was the best deal in gaming, but as they say, the math wasn't mathing. AAA game budgets had crossed $100 million. Under the traditional model, you recover that at $60 a pop. Developers would get nice bonuses if the game sold well too. Under Game Pass though, it launched at a monthly revenue with no clear sales numbers, and the economics were a little murky. Game Pass turned every first-party game into content that fed subscribers into a service. Good but incomplete became acceptable. The game didn't really need to be a must-buy. Meanwhile, Sony doubled down on must-buy blockbusters. God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon, Last of Us. Franchise titles that were big system sellers for Sony, giving people a reason to buy PlayStations. Microsoft had the money to back the Game Pass losses while they built up subscriber growth. But for that to happen, you needed games people wanted to play. Actual blockbuster games. In the fall of 2020, Microsoft announces its acquisition of ZeniMax for $7.5 billion. Makers of Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, Doom, Wolfenstein, all of it, now on Xbox. If you can't build the games fast enough, why not buy the studios that make them? Phil had to feed the Game Pass machine to grow it. But by 2021, Satya Nadella had a new obsession: the metaverse. Satya embraced it as the virtual and physical worlds converge. The metaverse is emerging as a first-class platform. He even described Halo as a metaverse. When Phil proposed acquiring Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, which would have made it the single largest acquisition Microsoft has ever made, he had to frame it the right way. Phil knew what he actually wanted: Call of Duty, Diablo, Candy Crush, the whole Activision library. Content that could finally compete with PlayStation's lineup. But that wasn't the pitch Satya needed to hear. So the pitch became assets for Microsoft's metaverse. That's right, in meetings with Satya and the board, the only way he was able to get them to approve the deal was to emphasize how it would help the Microsoft metaverse. When the acquisition closed, all Satya could talk about was how Activision was going to help their metaverse. And eventually, like all fads, the metaverse hype died. Microsoft wound down HoloLens. On earnings calls, Satya stopped bringing it up. He and really the entire tech industry have a new buzzword to juice their stock:
AI. 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 AI.
AI.
AI. AI. AI. AI. AI. AI.
But Phil knew what he had to say to get the deal done. Then, Sony went to war to stop the deal. Afraid they'd lose Call of Duty to Xbox as an exclusive, they argued to the FTC, the EU, and the UK's Competition and Markets Authority. PlayStation players bought tens of millions of copies of Call of Duty, and Sony collected a nice 30% cut on every sale of the game. That was the real threat. Phil purchased Activision just so they can launch exclusives on Xbox. But to get the deal done, they had to make concessions. Sony at first didn't even want concessions. They wanted to kill the deal entirely. For months, PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan told the media that the Xbox would purposely sabotage the PlayStation version of Call of Duty, which was a lie. Sony's own internal emails leaked, revealing they knew Microsoft wouldn't be that stupid to hurt a franchise they just spent billions for. Eventually, Microsoft agreed to a 10-year deal guaranteeing Call of Duty would remain on PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and Nvidia's cloud service. Phil had bought the content, but he'd surrender the exclusivity that was supposed to justify buying it. Every copy of Call of Duty sold on PlayStation now puts money in Microsoft's pocket. Sony's 120 million users didn't buy an Xbox, but they're paying Microsoft anyway. The biggest rival in gaming had become Microsoft's most profitable retail store. And Xbox would need that PlayStation money because putting Call of Duty on Game Pass cost Microsoft an estimated $300 million in lost sales in a single year. For years, Phil had air cover from Satya, but you don't spend $69 billion to keep doing things the nice way. The moment the Activision deal closed, that air cover thinned. Satya and the board demanded returns. And while everyone was arguing about Call of Duty, nobody was talking about the real prize: King. Candy Crush. Mobile gaming with 3 billion users generates more revenue than consoles and PC combined. And Xbox was desperate to crack into that market. They didn't just spend $69 billion to win a plastic box war, they had to think beyond that. The console war was over. Microsoft had just decided to collect rent instead. Halo Infinite launches in December 2021 after a full year of delays. The multiplayer was good, but the campaign launched without co-op, without Forge, and without features that defined the franchise for 20 years. The game was good, but this was Halo, Xbox's flagship franchise that revolutionized multiplayer gaming. But in the Game Pass era, good but incomplete had become acceptable. Game Pass needed feeding, and Halo fed it that holiday. Forza Horizon 5 launched, and that was one shining light for the company. But 2022 was a terrible year for Xbox. Starfield and Redfall both got delayed, and there was no major blockbuster. Well, unless you count Pentiment and Grounded. Fun little games, sure, but they pale in comparison to what Sony released that year. Games like Horizon, a new Gran Turismo, and God of War Ragnarok. Then Redfall finally launched, full of technical issues and poor gameplay design. Other games announced around this time were State of Decay 3 and Fable. Announced and then disappeared. During Phil's spending spree, he also picked up Undead Labs, the makers of State of Decay. Undead Labs had reports of sexual harassment and bullying. Employees reported they hoped that when Phil bought the company, that the culture would change. It didn't. Phil's motto was to buy the studios and let them do their thing. Sometimes it worked, like with Mojang. Other times, like with Undead Labs, it didn't. Its culture got worse through Phil's hands-off approach. Eventually it did get addressed. And then came Starfield, which launched in September of 2023. This was supposed to be an epic blockbuster game that would usher in a new era for Xbox. The game finally supposed to make people say, I need to buy an Xbox for this game. Critics gave it a solid score. Players were divided. It was vast but empty. After years of hype, it felt like a very large Bethesda game. Inside Bethesda at the time, employees questioned why Activision was able to have their games be multi-platform and not theirs. If you're a game maker, you want your game to be played by as many people as possible. It helps when you sell more copies of the game, you get a better bonus too, don't forget that. But Phil needed Starfield to be a massive hit. A system seller, a Game Pass growth engine to help the struggling sales of Xbox Series X and Series S. Around this time, leadership was getting nervous. Their console sales were getting lapped by PlayStation. And, more importantly, Game Pass growth stalled. They weren't meeting the forecast they had in terms of membership to justify these costs. In meetings, they admitted they hit their ceiling in terms of growth. Something drastic had to happen. And it did. May 7th, 2024, Microsoft announced a wave of studio closures. AlphaDog closed. Arcane Austin closed. Roundhouse Studios absorbed, then closed. And then the one that shocked everyone, Tango Gameworks closed. Tango had just shadow dropped Hi-Fi Rush in 2023. It was a super stylized music action game with fun controls, and it got great reviews from both critics and fans. Xbox said Hi-Fi Rush was exactly the kind of original swing they wanted and desperately needed. So what do you do after a surprise hit game wins a BAFTA, numerous game awards, and reaches 3 million players? Well, if you're Microsoft, you close the studio. Tango was mid-pitch on a Hi-Fi Rush sequel when the call came in. Microsoft said no, then closed them. As Shinji Mikami put it, Tango closed. Sad. When asked to explain, Spencer said, sometimes I have to make hard decisions that frankly are not decisions I love, but decisions that somebody needs to go make. From the outside, this was seen as Microsoft executives pressuring Phil to cut costs. 2 months later, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate got a price increase, 18% higher than the previous year. The timing couldn't have been worse. Xbox had just closed studios, canceled games. Now, weeks later, the price of the service those studios had been killing themselves to feed went up. And it wouldn't be the only time either. July 2nd, 2025. Over 500 years after the Kalmar Bloodbath, where mass executions took place in Sweden, Microsoft held their own mass execution in Redmond. A record 9,000 layoffs. Perfect Dark canceled. The Initiative, a prestige studio built from scratch in 2018, staffed with veterans from Naughty Dog, Santa Monica, BioWare, and Rockstar, shut down after 7 years without even shipping a single game. Everwild canceled after nearly a decade in development. A ZeniMax Online MMO codenamed Blackbird canceled before public reveal. Turn 10 Studios, makers of Forza Motorsport, reportedly lost nearly half its staff. Layoffs hit Halo Studios, Rare, Blizzard, Compulsion Games, and Call of Duty support teams including Raven Software, Sledgehammer Games, and High Moon Studios. Meanwhile, Microsoft posted a $27 billion quarterly net income. And like clockwork, a few months later, Game Pass price hikes. Freudian slip. Just like the year before, announced cuts, then raised prices. Game Pass Ultimate went from $19.99 a month to $29.99 a month in the US. A 50% jump overnight. A service that launched at $9.99 had, in just 6 years, tripled its price at the premium tier. Insiders said that Satya and the board grew tired of the Game Pass growth and needed to accelerate revenue to support the company's AI ambitions. You see, Microsoft had committed billions to OpenAI. Satya was reshaping Microsoft around AI. Gaming became a smaller and smaller afterthought for the company. Xbox co-founder Seamus Blackley put it plainly, Satya has a hammer called Gen AI, and there's a nail with an Xbox logo on it. When everything is Xbox, nothing is Xbox. When you can play Xbox games on your phone, your PC, your rival's console, what exactly is Xbox? Phil had made a choice. He said it loud. We're not trying to out-console Sony. Xbox lost the console wars to Sony badly, and Satya and Microsoft leadership demanded revenue. So how do you get gaming revenue when you struggle to sell consoles and have a lackluster games lineup? Well, you stop trying to fight a losing war and just exit the battlefield. Then you start selling off your munitions and weapons to your former enemy. On the official Xbox podcast, Phil Spencer announces what the internet quickly calls the first four. Hi-Fi Rush, Pentiment, Grounded, Sea of Thieves. All coming to PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch. Phil framed it carefully. Xbox was expanding. More players, more reach, more ecosystems. But the reality, more money. And money was needed. A year later, they would announce Indiana Jones and the Great Circle confirmed for PlayStation. Bethesda exclusivity had helped justify the $7.5 billion ZeniMax deal. Inside Bethesda, they were confused. Future titles were supposed to anchor the Xbox ecosystem. Now one of the highest profile releases crossed the aisle within months. Other first-party Xbox franchises would be announced to be released on Sony. Franchises like Gears of War, Fable, and Forza Horizon. Leadership spoke about ecosystem scale, software margins, endpoints. Fans, they heard something else. We give up. And soon, Phil would too. February 20th, 2026, Phil Spencer announces his retirement. He tried for years to bring back a slowly dying brand, but when it became clear that the Xbox best days were behind it and the company was more focused on AI, he gave up. According to reports, Phil took a long vacation a year earlier in February 2025. Teams inside Xbox had to wait weeks for sign-off on key decisions while he was gone. Weeks. In a division already bleeding momentum, projects stalled waiting for an answer from a guy who was apparently mentally checked out. Seamus Blackley again summed it up best when he said, "The game that Phil had been playing for a long time, managing the beast so he could continue to try to do the right thing for games, I think that finally just wore him out." So it wasn't too much of a surprise when he announced his retirement. But what was surprising was who got passed over and who got the role. Sarah Bond, long considered next in line for the role, wasn't just passed over, but gently pushed out. The framing around Sarah Bond arrived fast and sharp. The Verge reported that she had staked her career reputation on the idea of Xbox being everywhere. Her strategy had been failing internally and been questioned multiple times. She's also been described as someone who is tough to work with, and someone who built a team structure that meant if you didn't follow the vision or questioned it, you were out. She had been carefully managing her image, making her appear to look like a friendly gamer like Phil Spencer. Some Xbox employees had long thought it was inevitable she would be looked over. In fairness though, Bond grew up gaming with her father, King's Quest II on his PC at 6 years old. She was an actual gamer. Maybe not as hardcore as Phil, but she did spend 9 years climbing from corporate VP of gaming business development to Xbox president, and had a great resume. Yale Economics, Harvard MBA, those are pretty big degrees. And before Microsoft, she worked at McKinsey, then T-Mobile as chief of staff to the CEO. Some people inside the company think she was framed to be the scapegoat like Don Matrick. Other people say that Satya and the board didn't want her because she had worked closely with Phil for years. If you're planning to reset Xbox around AI and platform services, you don't keep the lieutenant from the previous campaign. Either way, she was blindsided by the news. Only hours before the announcement, she posted a LinkedIn message asking fans how they play so they can continue improving Xbox accessibility features. Not exactly the kind of message you'd post hours before departing the company. Insiders say that once the news broke she got passed over for the job, she left. Phil's replacement, Asha Sharma, a former president of Microsoft's core AI product division. Azure AI Studio, Azure OpenAI Service, the AI Model Catalog, developer tools from Microsoft Copilot. Her background spans Meta, Instacart, and Microsoft's AI division. She actually did start a career at Microsoft, but her career is rooted in AI and platform operations.
But now we're seeing that every company out there across almost every industry is turning to AI.
Not game development or publishing. She had never shipped a game, and is not really a gamer, despite the fancy photo shoot that the PR team set her up in, complete with a black leather jacket to make her look like a hip, edgy gamer. But Satya and the board wanted someone at the helm who can make Xbox another AI lever for the company. Sharma's first official act? Give the reset a name. The Return of Xbox. Which implies Xbox had gone somewhere it shouldn't have. She's no dummy. She knew exactly what the internet was thinking. An AI executive running a gaming company in 2026? When those two words in the same sentence make developers a little uneasy and gamers pretty pissed off. Then she reached for the renegade spirit, saying, "The next 25 years belongs to the teams who dare to build something surprising, something no one else is willing to try, and have the patience to see it through. We have done this before, and I am here to help us do it again." The original renegades who started Xbox used to talk like that. They were actual gamers who built Xbox by defying Microsoft's corporate logic from inside. Now Asha is very, very smart. People who worked with her describe her as incredibly sharp. But she is not a beep-boop-bop gamer. But does she really even need to be in order to lead a gaming business? Let me know what you think in the comments. Now a lot of people will say she's out of touch with gaming. So here's an interesting story from a former coworker. Early in her career, she actually helped craft PR strategy for the Xbox One launch of all things. She had a big idea and was hell-bent on making someone the face of Xbox. No, not Master Chief. Someone she thought could connect with gamers and really sell consoles. This is who she wanted as the face of Xbox. Xbox is in great hands. In one of my all-time favorite games, Halo Reach, Noble Team fights a doomed military campaign. That Xbox One announcement didn't just lose a console generation, it basically burned Reach to the ground, handed Sony a 4-year head start in console sales, and built an exclusive library of games that no subscription service or acquisition spree could ever come close to. Phil himself admitted it. We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games. Phil was basically Noble 6, dropped into a battle that was already lost, fighting to buy enough time for something, anything to work. Dumping Kinect, backwards compatibility, crossplay, Game Pass. He kept Xbox alive when Microsoft considered pulling the plug. But just like Halo Reach, you're not saving the planet. Phil wasn't saving Xbox, just buying enough time for it to get handed off to someone else. A millennial AI executive who has never shipped a game or managed a game studio, and answers to a CEO obsessed with AI. Hey, now that she's in charge, maybe she can finally make do on her big idea and get George Clooney to come bring Xbox back to life. Phil spent his whole career trying not to become a corporate executive. In the end, the corporation won anyway. In the game, Noble 6 is overwhelmed and killed during a final stand against Covenant forces. Phil tried, but in the end, he too was overwhelmed. And just like Reach, Xbox was always going to fall. Under Phil, games were shit-broken or not at all. Halo's legacy was destroyed thanks in large part to him putting Bonnie Ross in charge. That's a future video, by the way. Studios got closed, the best deal in gaming tripled in price, being vague about first-party game exclusives only to put them all on PlayStation. Even the Xbox console, the thing those renegades fought Bill Gates to build, became optional. And yet, even today, Microsoft just announced something new. Their next generation console, Project Helix. Some insiders say it could be the last Xbox console ever made. Asha Sharma is stepping onto the battlefield for Xbox's final stand. Noble 6 didn't destroy Reach. He just couldn't save it either.